Come on in, guys. Give it a couple minutes.
Foxy lady. Ooh. Here I come, baby. I'm coming to get you.
Fox 5, Nana, baby. I don't know, baby. I don't know if they're ready for this one here. I mean, let me walk with my people real quick, young. Oh. Yes. The Don Gargan. Yo, I need a dude I can throw the clip on. Keep my little wrist charm, do the sip on. And fuck he thought, see your girl puts it on him. Ill Nana style, but I never gonna call him. I keep him stolen, Nana so sick, big gun cock fucking I ride big dick, whoa. Especially when Masoni be on me. Your girlfriend hard, gotta bounce to the goddess. A rap this, a fact, every time I hit the ground I bounce right on backwards. In fact, this with track, now don't make me have to go and flip my words on backwards. Now you rappers must know how the fuck you gon' try stop young fucking flow now. I got the Teflon Dawn flow, and every time I spit it off, it's like Taekwondo. Talkie girl from Jamaica, Kingston, you know we're run for ya. Brooklyn, you know about Tilana. Ladies are come for done for ya. Spanish Town, Portmore, Jungle, River. Talkie girl from Jamaica, ladies are come for done for ya. Yes, boss your gun for the young Gargon. I'm coming through with the Fox 5 squadron. You go with me, I'm right at you, hon. I swear, without that dog, it's not even fun. Who want Fox level? There can only be one. But nah, who I'm kidding, ain't none of these bitches spit wrong. I would not retire. Call the fire department to stop the fire. Hot as hell. It ain't easy being me, man. This job is hell. Can't beat us, join us, might as well. Oh Lord, there she go popping shit. Difference is I'm the best, say the opposite. You got something to say, homie, speak your mind. Don't be mad cause this blood clot streets is mine. Dirty. Hey.
All right, good afternoon, guys. We're here with a very interesting topic. I came across an article. I'm gonna read a snippet of that article and give you my thoughts based off of my knowledge and research, okay? The article says, should childhood trauma be treated as a public health crisis? All right, I'll get back to that. Should childhood trauma be treated as a public health crisis? All right, and let me go on to read a little bit here. A new study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association suggests that the answer should be yes. It shows how the effects of childhood trauma persist and are linked to mental illness and addiction in adulthood. And researchers say it suggests that it might be more effective to approach trauma as a public health crisis than to limit treatment to individuals. What they mean by that, then to limit, doesn't mean that treatment is limited, but it just means that you don't want to just use treatment as the only source of resolving childhood trauma and issues in adults. Okay, let me go on to say this. The study drew on the experiences of participants from the Great Smoky Mountains study, which followed 1,420 children from mostly rural parts of Western North Carolina over a period of 22 years. They were interviewed annually during their childhood, then 4 additional times during adulthood. This study has something This study has something other similar studies don't, says William Copeland, a professor of psychiatry at the University of Vermont who led the research. Instead of relying on recalled reports of childhood trauma, the researchers analyzed data collected while the participants were kids and their experience were fresh. And the researchers applied rigorous statistical analysis to rule out confounding factors, okay? It goes on to say, even when the team accounted for other adversities aside from trauma, like low income and family hardships and adult traumas, the associations between childhood trauma and adult hardships remained clear. The associations remained clear. The study is probably the most rigorous test we have to date of the hypotheses that early childhood trauma has these strong, independent effects on adult outcomes, he says. For Copeland, the wide-ranging impacts of trauma call for broad-based policy solutions in addition to individual interventions. It has to be a discussion we have on a public health policy level, he says. Nearly 31% of the children told researchers that they had experienced one traumatic event, like a life-threatening injury, sexual or physical abuse, or witnessing or hearing about a loved one's traumatic experience. And 22.5% of participants had experienced 2 traumas, while 14.8% experienced 3 or more. The childhoods of participants who went through traumatic events and those who didn't were markedly different. Participants with trauma histories were 1.5 times as likely to have psychiatric problems and experience family instability and dysfunction than those without, and 1.4 times as likely to be bullied. They were also 1.3 times more likely to be poor than participants who didn't experience trauma. When these children grew up, psychiatric problems and other issues persisted, even after researchers adjusted for factors like recall bias, race, and sex. The impact of those childhood psychiatric problems and hardships, the associations remained. Participants who experienced childhood trauma were 1.3 times more likely to develop psychiatric disorders than those who did not experience trauma, and 1.2 times more likely to develop depression or substance abuse disorder. Participants with histories of trauma were also more likely to experience health problems, participate in risky behavior, struggle financially, and have violent relationships or problems making friends. And the more childhood trauma a person experienced, the more likely they were to have those problems in adulthood. All right, so let me just stop there and get back to the screen here. That email was, you can find that on, let me copy the link and put it here for you guys to read the rest, but it was NPR.org provided this research and wrote this article, okay? Now, I find that, first of all, let me just say personally that I am ecstatic that we're starting to have more and more of these conversations, and people are more receptive because they're looking to find other answers to not only trauma, like trauma wasn't the case or wasn't the topic, but what I find is that people are trying to find the root cause of adult behavior and adult addiction, because addiction is becoming or seeming as if it's harder and harder to crack. Despite the amount of treatment centers and despite the amount of treatment that has been given, we have high percentages of people who do relapse and end up back into these treatment centers. So due to that fact, they're trying to come up with, or trying to figure out what the problem really is. I know someone who was in the field, the drug treatment field, who says that if she had let's say a class or anyone in class who has come through her treatment center and has left, relapsed and came back and wanted to be in her class, she wouldn't allow that person in her class because she know, not to say that she wasn't a good group facilitator or a good drug treatment coordinator, but her thought process is that somewhere along the line that she may have failed this person. If they're so comfortable to relapse and come back in my class, then there's something about my presentation that's not giving them the nudge and allowing them or giving them the information where they can hold themselves accountable to will themselves out of their addiction. So she does not, she will, direct them to another coordinator. All right. And that's just something to keep in mind. Unhealthy ego does a lot of holding us back. And if we're unable to see the larger picture, we'll also hold people that we should be helping. We'll also hold them back as well. So, let's just take in mind that it's not about you or I, but it's about us and how can we best serve the people who are in need of our help. Remember that we come off as the experts, right? We have this, we've went to, whether we've been to college, whether we've paid to take classes, whether we've done our own research, whatever the case may be, okay? We put ourselves in positions to help, and we are perceived as the experts to those who are in need of our help, who just can't seem to do it on their own without some type of guidance. So let's take that into account, okay? So now let me give you my, let me close this window here. This is a little chilly. Hold on. Window, door. Okay. So now, here's how Abraham Maslow, for those of you who are into psychology, sociology, you may have heard of the psychologist called Abraham Maslow. And have you heard of, well, let's stick with him, his hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, okay? And then there's another psychologist by the name of Walter Bradford Cannon. He created he coined the fight or flight theory. Okay, so the flight or fight theory. Yeah, fight or flight. The fight or flight theory ties in with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. All right, so let me read the hierarchy of needs for you. It's a pyramid. All right, now let me tell you how this is directly connected to the snippet of the article that I read. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all the way at the bottom, which is the basic needs, is you start off with the psychological needs, and that's basic. Food, water, warmth, rest. A little step up from that is the safety needs, which is security and safety. The psychological needs are belongingness and love needs, intimate relationships and friends. A little step up from that, which is a part of the self-fulfillment needs, is esteem needs, prestige, and feeling of accomplishment. All right. Then another step up from that, which is self-actualization, which is the very top, I don't want to say the end all, but it's the top of the pyramid. It's achieving one's full potential, including creative activities. Okay. Now, when we're going back to trauma, okay, most children are stuck in the basic needs at the bottom of the pyramid, whereas their trauma the trauma in their lives has happened between their psychological needs stages and the safety needs stages, which is psychological needs is from when you're a baby, infant, until you're like toddler age, right? Food, water, warmth, rest. That's That's the basic. So baby to toddler stage, right? So the step a little above that, which is the safety needs, which is security and safety. That is the era and the age range from toddler to tween. I think they call it the tween, or it's right before being a teenager. No, tween is for twins, but right before the age of becoming a teenager, right? At your adolescent years, because I don't always use the big words. I always I'm more simplicity is my thing. So in your adolescent years is where most children are affected in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And that's where it interferes with your security and safety, okay? And the challenge with that is that most children are stuck in the safety and security part of the pyramid because those needs haven't been met, okay? And depending on where you live or your situation. Now you have some people that, they come out of it, mom or dad or whatever the case may be. There's a divorce or however, and they go on to living a better and a more secure life. Okay. Although divorces may affect that child during their that safety and security needs, because it's now like, well, parents are split. How am I going to survive? What am I going to do without mom? What am I going to do without dad? Or if one of their parents died, that sort of thing. All right. But then what about the children who are stuck in those situations because the guardians, whether it's their parents or the adult that's taking care of them, don't see a way to remove themselves out of that situation? Hence, if they're staying in that situation, so is the child. So that child need of safety and security is never being met because it's consistent and it's a part of their lifestyle. And hence in that, they're consistently in the fight or flight mode. Now, the challenge with that is that, and this is why we have a lot of children who run away from home, right? But then there's a lot more children who don't run away from home. So now let's look at the effects of, and this is not something that a child has been taught. This is something that psychologists coined the theory of due to analyzing those who have been afflicted by trauma. So it is something that automatically happens. Like there's chemicals that are released within us that set us into a certain mind frame because self-preservation, which is the first law of nature, is first. So it is basic instinct for a person to want to preserve self whenever they are faced with any type of threat, that anything that it threatens their safety and their existence. Okay, so the challenge with this is that children who are stuck in fight or flight mode, but are still in the circumstance that causes that very same reaction, how does that child deal? It's a constant conflict, and it's like an oxymoron because it's not fitting, it's not going together. So it throws a lot of their chemical their chemical becomes imbalanced. Their psychological state is now rewiring. Okay, it's their whole genetic code. All of that is rewiring so that they're able to survive within those circumstances of that are threatening their existence. However, they're doing it the best that they can with not the most clarity, meaning they're still children. So how do they decipher or have correct discernment for how they are taking care of themselves in the midst of this lifestyle that they're living, because they're not being taken care of? Okay, and we're not talking about, having food or whatever, or someone's paying the rent and they have a place to sleep, because having a place to sleep is still not safety if they're being sexually abused, physically abused, psychologically abused, verbally abused, or if there's someone else in the household that is being abused. If they're growing up in a domestic violence, any type of domestic violence case, it throws them off because it puts them in a zone of they're not safe. They're not safe. Okay, so this is why childhood trauma is to be treated as a public health crisis. Okay, studies show that as those needs in Maslow hierarchies needs, as those needs are met, it is automatic that the child in that situation, their confidence grows and their desire to want to achieve also maximizes. All right. So does their confidence. Everything it maximizes, it falls into place and it goes accordingly. But when those needs are not met, therein lies the challenge. And then it is, we have to look at it as it's with an objective eye, because every case is different, right? Now you have people with their own perspectives on what they think life should be. And this is even children. So from the respective child and their psychological thought process is where you're going to see the outcome and what they choose to do, whether it's turning to drugs and alcohol to cope, or whether it's they're addicted to bad behavior. So some adults are not turning to drugs and alcohol, but they've become very hostile. They've turned out to be bullies. They've turned out to be unpleasant individuals. So it all depends on that individual's perspective on what they think life should be and how they view themselves versus how they view other people, and also how they view life. Okay, so this is a very complex situation, and it calls for all hands to be on deck, and it also calls for people to get in with their thinking caps and think solution based, and just throw everything in the tub and let us pick out what is actually more effective, what is effective for the solution. Okay. What else did I want to say in regards to this situation? And it's just all ties in. Okay. I did a Facebook Live on, someone posed a question on being surprised that children are picking up less and less on live social cues. Okay. And I found that to be a very interesting status. And I related to it. Okay. And it is perceived that some people looked at it as, we're in the era of technology, and children are playing a lot of video games, and they're having less and less human interaction and contact. Yes, that has a lot to do with it. However, this very same topic that we're talking about now also plays a big role in children not picking up on live cues, okay? Because live social cues are nothing but nonverbal communication, right? And in order for you to build a healthy understanding of nonverbal communication, you would have to have been raised in a healthy environment where that was cultivated, where that skill set was cultivated. Okay, but when you have children who are coming from a background of trauma, it is very challenging to have cultivate that skill set, because those children are in the fight or flight mode. Their needs on the Maslow hierarchy of self needs aren't being met. So it is very challenging for them to look around and try to find salvage in everyone else. What innately happens, and this is nature, is self-preservation, because that's the first law of nature. So what happens is they go into a mind of urgency to preserve life, and they're finding the best way that they can to preserve themselves in such circumstances. Therefore, the body language that they're picking up on is the abusive body language, because they're teaching themselves what to look out for, so how they can protect themselves, right? So they don't understand, or let me say this, it's very challenging for them to understand other forms of communication via body language, which is nonverbal, because they're fixated on their safety. Hence, the only thing they're taught, they taught themselves, because the adults around them are not giving them a healthy perspective on how to get along with other people, right? So what they taught themselves is how to preserve myself, self-preservation, and how to be safe. So the cues that they're looking out for is when an adult or someone is becoming agitated, where they may become abusive or angry, or anything or any behavior, whether it's physical, non-physical, passive aggressive, cynical, any of those types of behavior that can turn around and hurt them in any way, shape, or form. They learned how to pick up on that very well. So they can pick up on that very well, so that they can in turn be proactive on protecting themselves as much as that they can be. But in the interim, not realizing that they're actually reactive. They're reactive because they're reacting to someone else's behavior on how to keep themselves protected. All right, so I am, again, I have to say this again, I am so happy that we are having more and more of these discussions, and it's time that we have them in depth, and we look at how trauma relates to and connects to everything that we are witnessing in the world today. Everything. It relates, you know. And of course, everyone hasn't gone through trauma, but you have some people who are naturally have personality disorders without having any trauma in their background. This is their character, right? And that character hasn't been balanced out because let's look at the era we are in, right? This is 2018. We're going almost into 2019. This is the era or the age of information, right? So what type of information were being dispelled way back then before I was born? All right, so let's understand that people had limited information back then, and parenting does not come with a booklet. So there's no, you know, who tells a parent how, you know, or let's say this, how does a parent know how to do right parenting or wrong parenting? There's a lot of adults still today in 2018 that believe that when they see bad behavior in children, that when they get of a certain age, they'll eventually grow out of it. Some people believe that. They will just grow out of it. And I don't believe that, because I come from a background of being abused. I've had a very traumatic past. You know, I'm not going to say it's the worst. There's some people who have had, you know, more in-depth trauma than I have, but my trauma is very layered, and you know, it's just, yeah, it's very complex. I've had a mom. My mother was diagnosed manic depressant, and you know, bipolar. So she has had nervous breakdowns. Every year my mom had a nervous breakdown. My grandmother had to raise us permanently from the time I was 8 years old on up. I was in the 3rd grade. All right, so that was one traumatic issue. Then there were the other issue with me being sexually abused, physically abused, verbally abused, not affirmed, not, you know, loved properly. Like I didn't know how love feel, or how it feel, or what it looks like for another individual to truly love me. I couldn't explain that to you. I know what it feels and look like for me to love me, because I've learned to love myself. But I can't tell you what that is to be doted on or loved or affirmed or been I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. But when I get married, though, I'll be sure to tell you what that is for, or what that looks like and feels like when a man truly loves you. I'll be able to explain that when that happens. However, I will be 42 years old next month, and I can't tell you what it feels like and looks like to be loved. Okay? I've gotten past my trauma. However, there are some things that are still not connected because I haven't received it. Therefore, it is a challenge for me to communicate that with other people. Had I not worked on myself, it would have been a challenge. And then there's certain things that I don't recognize that other people may be trying to show me because I don't know what that looks like. It takes a little while longer for me to receive that. And I just can't receive it off of nonverbal communication. I need actual verbal communication. And that is also going to be a challenge with some children who are dealing with trauma. They will actually need things to be communicated to them because they don't know what it is. They don't know how to receive it, and from a nonverbal standpoint. Now, there lies another challenge, because the other challenge in that is that children from that background who become adults can become taken advantage of by people who don't have good intent, who are very well in speaking the love language, but not really having the intent of love and the action of love. And being that they don't know what love is, because their background haven't shown them that, no one taught them that, they don't know whether these people are lying to them or not. So not only do they come from a background of trauma and at a disadvantage, they become adults that put themselves in situations to be taken advantage of because of cues that they don't know. That is very challenging for them to pick up on because they don't know. And, these types of conversations weren't being had. So how do they know this? And, the question is, there's the question or the saying, how do you know what questions to ask if you don't know that there's even a question to be asked? So in that sense, they don't even know that it was something that they should inquire about or build upon, because they don't know. They weren't taught that. You see what I'm saying? So it's a very delicate. This is a very delicate topic. It's very complex. It needs people who takes this with a seriousness and a lot of complex thought to apply some type of solution and be a part of the total result. All right. I hope I gave you guys something to think about today. Of course, whenever I'm in presentations and facilitating, I go into a different depth because now I'm dealing with individuals who can explain their individual perspective. But just here on this recording, I don't want to put too many other perspectives out there of people because, due to privacy issues. However, I have no problems with giving snippets of my own, just to give you a little bit more depth and understanding of where I'm coming from. Okay, and I hope that this in some way helps you in your endeavor and in any of your facilitation or classes or workshops that you may do. Okay, for those of you who need steps on how to rebuild yourself, self-developing steps, reach out to me. Let me put my number here because I do run a program, a self-wealth program based off of 3 pillars: self-awareness, self-enlightenment, and self-empowerment. And best believe in my program, we do address trauma. I don't mention the word trauma because, people in that sector, many times they run from their past, so I don't always do things in such a bold way in that sense. However, trauma is at the crux of my program. Okay, but I'm going to put my email address and my cell phone number there, and you give me a call. And depending on what you're looking for, I'll send you what my prices are, and we'll get working together to each one teach one. One hand washes the other. According to what Maya Angelou says, when you learn, you teach. And according to something else she said, You can't go through life with a catcher's mitt on both hands. You know, you got to be able to throw something back. And that's that's my intent here, or always my intent, always throwing something back. Best believe I have the catcher's mitt on because always I'm always learning something new, always open to other perspectives. However, it's about now teaching as well. There's a lot of work for us to do in this world. I hope you guys are having a great day, and see you sometime during this week with another topic. I'm going to leave you my cell phone and email address, and you be great. Okay, you guys enjoy. Later.